Hey everybody, it's Bust with our patch notes review of the 4.5 patch. This is the variety patch for Glory in Navori. It's going to be bringing us 10 new cards into the game. It's going to have lots of buffs and nerfs and changes to the Eternal cards that haven't been featured in Standard any longer, and it's also going to be ushering in that Eternal format into the competitive scene. And so the ranked queues, the gauntlets, and the Runeterra Open, which there are 2 of this month, are all going to be featuring the Eternal format. And so, before we dive in and get to talking about all of those new cards, I did have 2 topics in terms of the variety set that I wanted to stop and talk about. If you don't care about that, feel free to go down to the little time seek skippy bar below and skip onto the card reviews. But again, there's 2 things I want to talk about. First and foremost, I feel like Riot got the variety patch a little bit out of order. Now, whether or not that's the variety patch out of order or the Eternal format being featured out of order, I'm not entirely certain. You can take that however you want, but I love this monthly cycle of new cards, balance patch, variety set, new cards, balance patch, variety set. It gives you a lot of changes to the game so it never gets stale. But as you add new cards to the format, they're going to be much more impactful in the standard format than they are in Eternal. And so I don't know how many cards are currently in these things, but if there's like 800 cards in Eternal and 400 cards in standard, and you add 10 cards in, you math nerds out there can do the mathematics, but the percentage change in the set is much larger in standard than it would be in Eternal. And so it just gives these new cards a much greater chance for impact in standard than it would in Eternal. And I'm worried that some of these cards aren't really going to get the chance to shine as they are released into the Eternal format, to where if they were released into the standard format, they might have a little bit more opportunity. And so I'm kind of curious if in future patches and future iterations, if we shouldn't get the new cards, have that be the standard format. The balance patch comes out. With that balance patch, the Eternal format is featured. That gives us the first opportunity to play with the new cards in the Eternal format. Well, they're kind of still fresh in our minds as the new cards have been released. And then as the variety set comes out, we switch back into standard, and those variety set cards having a little bit more opportunity to have some impact on the meta. Again, we'll see how it goes, but this could be a very small thing, just out here nitpicking about it. But I feel like as a content creator, you can definitely see the spikes of interest in the game. It always kind of centers around when new cards and these big changes happen. And I feel like the big change isn't as big as it could be, attaching this variety set to an Eternal format. And so, again, we'll see. This is the first time going with this. No one else really follows these really high impact kind of balance change formats. Go to Magic and you're waiting like 3 months for shit to happen. And so I'm very excited and I'm very hyped nonetheless, even if I feel like these things might be a little bit out of order. The second thing is with the variety patch itself. And if we think back to the previous variety set, it was very impactful. It had a lot of new features coming into the standard format. I feel like the variety set is a great way to kind of enhance ideas of old. And so we see a little bit of that in this new set with the release of a lot of Weapon Master style cards. I think that that's absolutely fantastic. I think if you want to say, go back and look at an archetype like Nightfall or Daybreak or Plunder or whatever, I think these variety sets give you a wonderful opportunity to just kind of add these kind of cards into the format without having to kind of completely dedicate new set space to old archetypes. And so while the release of the Spider card in the previous one may not have been a very high quality, impactful release, I really like the idea and thoughts and themes behind it, to where if we want to give Elise and her spider friends a little bit of support, you can do that here in this variety set without really taking away from the thematics of the current set. That spider doesn't really fit in with the plunder theme. If it came out now, it doesn't fit into the World Ender Aatrox theme of the previous expansion, but just having it as kind of a varietal card coming out in between big sets, I think that's a very interesting way to do it. So where that's going, if you haven't caught yourselves up with the variety card reveal, Riot has done this a little bit. I'll talk about these cards more in depth as we go through the kind of review section, but as you can see here with the Royal Shimmer Wing, it carries the bird subtype. And so Riot has kind of taken this set as an opportunity to kind of preview the next one, right? We're getting a lot of new subtypes to all of the cards in the format. If you're interested in hearing these subtypes, there's a article on the main Playing Runeterra site called I Am a Bird, to where they go in depth on what a bird is and what a cat is. I'm sure there are people raging about this in some way, shape, or form. I just don't care. I think it's interesting that they're adding subtypes to cards, but I'm not going to get in the middle of whether or not a hungry owlcat is a cat, or whether or not a whatever that 7/6 overwhelmed Freylord Alpha Wildclaw is that a cat. I don't know. I don't care. I'm not getting in. I'm not getting into that. Just tell me what the cards do. But there is an article on the main site titled I Am a Bird, explaining some of these new subtypes coming in. But no, back to where my point is trying to go. I don't think I like these kind of leaking the idea to the future cards. Now, it's kind of like counterintuitive if the hype building is really going to be tied into a part of this set. As I've kind of scrolled through Reddit and looked, a lot of people are really hype about the prospects of, say, Nidalee coming up or Rengar coming up, and it does build up hype into the next set. And so I'm not entirely certain how I feel about this. I did really like that idea, again, kind of going back to spiders and saying, hey, it's not the time to be printing spiders cards. They have no thematic reasoning to be in Glory in Navori, but we feel the need to give Elise and team a little bit of love in terms of the spiders archetype. Then sure, the variety set's a great price for that. I'm not entirely certain how I feel about it as the kind of lead up, the kind of tease to the next expansion. And so we'll see. Maybe this will grow on me. Maybe this will change. But this has been, a definite tease towards the next expansion, and kind of a leaving away from that idea of just kind of enhancing older archetypes. And so we'll see how it goes. Again, that's not a complaint. I'm super stoked to be ready to jump into the variety patch here. I think we're going to have loads of fun over the course of the next month, but it's some nice food for thought. It's something to think about. It's something that you can go on Reddit and bitch about with no real rhyme or reason to your arguments. Something is different. It's time to throw up in arms and have an uproar, right? They made a change. Time to start bitching. And so again, it's different. Maybe it'll grow on me. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'll disagree with it. We have plenty of time to decide on that with how we feel, but it's definitely interesting to see what's going to come out of these variety sets and what kind of usage that they're going to have, other than generating a little bit of hype in between the big sets. And so, moving forward, first, we're going to talk about the variety set cards. They unfortunately didn't make their way onto the main page. I thought that the Play Runeterra site would have the variety cards up by now, but they're only hanging out here on Reddit. And so, it might be a sticky post. I don't entirely remember. You can just go and Google search patch 4.5 variety cards, and it should be the top result on the thing. But these are unfortunately on Reddit and not on the main page. But there are 10 new cards coming at us. First and foremost here, we have Condense. And I think this one is arguably very strong. I think that this is a card that it's going to be a menace in two separate ways. I think as we look towards the Eteranl format, this really has a lot of opportunity to fit itself into combo decks. And so as Eteranl has a larger card pool, Eteranl is going to have a much stronger collection of cards. You're going to have to either be going much faster than you would in standard, or you're going to have to be doing things that are just more powerful and degenerate than you would have in standard. And so Condense ties right into that. I think of, in terms of Eteranl, if you maybe look at things like Mischievous Mirai, as to where Mischievous Mirai landed in the kind of OTK powder keg style decks, to where you would put the Mirai on the board, chain off a bunch of spells, and then kill your opponent with like a 10 damage warning shot. And I think Condense is very interesting in that kind of sense, given that you would play the Mirai and need to untap into the next turn. to then be able to pop off and win the game. And so if you had to drop the Mirai and then it would just get killed, you were in kind of a bind since the key build around aspect of your deck was now gone. But if you're playing the Mirai and you have 2 mana backed up, and then your opponent tries to remove it, you get to drop Condense on the Mirai, you get the Powder Keg, you get the copy in hand. That's great, because now as you roll into the next turn, you can put a Mirai on board for just a single mana, and then try and pop off with your combo from there. And so moving on even from there, if you want to get 2 copies of the Mirai on the board, the Condense really ties into that. And so from just a high power level aspect, I think that it has a lot of potential. Also, it gets generated by Conchologist. And so if we're looking more towards the land of Standard, to where if you want to think of playing decks like Nora that just want to flood the board with a bunch of garbagey units until you can play your really powerful card on turn 9, Condense coming out of Conchologist plays fantastically towards that as well. You play Conchologist, generate Condense your Conchologist, play the new copy of Conchologist, get a new spell. Just gives you a fantastic chain that you can play all the way down the board, and then it also works with any of your other value-generating cards. And so I think it has a lot of potential. This is one of just the better all-around value-style cards that's been put into the game up at this point. It gets exceptionally better as you have summon effects. It gets better if you have ways to reduce the cost of this card. There should be a lot of interesting and fun ways to fit this thing into the format. Up next, we have Perfidious Promoter. Sorry, I had a big word coming at me that I knew I was going to have trouble saying. I knew I had a cat getting ready to jump on me. It was about to be a real struggle. But no, Perfidious Promoter, 4 mana, 4/4. When you refill mana, create a fleeting follower in your hand that you can exactly afford. This card is garbage. And so there is a lot of power in having these kind of regenerative effects as to where this guy can generate tons and tons and tons of value. If you have an attuned unit and you regenerate a mana, you get a 1-drop, you play a Shell Shocker. Maybe you just play Shell Shockers over and over and over and over again with that exact mana requirement kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to ask yourself what you're getting out of this 8 and 9 and 10 mana investment, and it's probably realistically not enough. And so I just don't think this guy's good enough. Stat-wise, he doesn't do enough. He is a 4/4, which is kind of interesting. He's bigger than a 3/3, right? A 3/3 stat line is what you're really looking at in terms of a baseline, so he is bigger than that, but I don't think his effect is going to be big enough to actually do anything. Up next, we have the Altar to Unity, and this is the one that's been getting... Oh my god, I fucking hate this. It's just... I hate this Reddit thing, right? You click on the image, it just reloads the thing. If you try to open the image in a new tab, it just takes you to the same thread again. I have to click on the thing and then open the image in the new tab. All right, we figured it out. But we got to the Altar of Unity. When I'm summoned, you draw a unit, so it does replace itself. And then when you summon an ally, you grow its stats equal to its cost. And this one, it does have a lot of potential for power. It's really going to kind of depend on the cards that are being used to team up with it, though. And so you're going to be looking towards things like summon effects. And so if you have the double bird, the 4-cost elite bird that with the Altar of Unity would become 4/4s as they come into play, that's the kind of effect that you're going to have to find to make this really useful. It's not something that you really get out of Demacia, though, right? Demacia, if you're looking kind of like up the curve, you start with Cytheria. She doesn't get any bonuses. You start with, then you have a random 3/2 for 2. It doesn't get any bonuses. You move up to 3 mana. You have a Loyal Badger Bear that doesn't get any bonuses. And you have to really find these low stat, high cost kind of cards, and they don't exist in Demacia. And so it's not to say that you can't look towards another faction to find this kind of effect, but I think this one's really going to struggle to kind of find a place to where it really fits, and you're getting enough value out of this card to make up for playing a 4-mana landmark in the middle of the game. And so it just doesn't really scale well, in my opinion, assuming that this works the way that I suspect it does. When it says grow its stats, that works like Lulu, right? Lulu says that she grows a unit to 4/4. And so I'm assuming in my head that you play the bird, it grows it to a 4/4. If you play a Quinn bird, at 2 mana. That would upgrade to a 2/2, and these units aren't just getting stats across the board. And so you don't play Loyal Badger Bear, it gets +3/+3 and becomes a 7/7. If I'm wrong on that, you have to kind of reevaluate, but if I'm right on it, this card is garbage. If I'm wrong on it and your Badger Bear becomes a 7/7, this card does have a lot of actual potential, especially in decks kind of like Scouts, to where you're playing Marai Warden. Marai Warden comes on board, grows by +2/+2, generates the 1-drop that grows by +1/+1. They're getting an additional +6 stats out of just a 2-cost card. And so with that, Altar of Unity has a lot of high power. It's going to be a staple of many decks to come. But if it works in that Lulu fashion like I imagine, I don't think that there's enough cards around for this to really work out. And so we'll have to wait till the game gets here, the day gets here. I haven't seen anything to indicate which mode this card actually works in. Up next, we have Blowback. And Blowback, oh my gosh, I did it again. Image. Open image. There we go. And Blowback, it has the problem of costing 4 mana. And so it's a 4-cost card. You deal 1 to the enemy nexus and 1 to an enemy unit. You can discard up to 2 cards to increase the damage. And so getting a 6 damage hit, 3 to the nexus, 3 to a unit for 4 mana is not that bad of a deal, but this 4 mana breakpoint is incredibly painful. We've seen over the course of time, that is the breakpoint to where that spell has to be super powerful or it's just not going to make the cut. A 3 mana spell you can play purely out of spell mana. A 4 mana card makes you dip into your real mana and starts to mess with your curve. And I think Blowback costing 4 mana is probably going to be the breaking point to where this card is just not playable. It may find its way as a kind of one-of into a discard-centric deck. If more discard cards get printed, it might find its way out into the meta like that, but I don't think that this is really going to make an impact, as I've been playing a bunch of things like Samira Jinx over the course of the past month. I've never really been in a spot to where this is a card I've been like, oh yeah, I want a bunch of those in my deck. It just seems like something that's going to clog up your hand while you have an experimenter in hand, and you're just going to be kind of stuck with it. And so it's something that may hit the meta as a 1-of. It's definitely not going to be a 3-of, and I think most of the decks playing the discard themes are going to be closer to 0 copies of this thing than 3. And so it's not to say that it's completely unplayable. 6 damage for 4 mana is not a horrible deal, but that 4 mana breakpoint has been hit, and I don't think that this is enough of a good enough breakpoint to make it into the lands if constructed. Up next, we have Captain Indari. Where we go? Open image. There we go. And so a 6 mana 5/5, when I'm summoned, I improvise, so it's absolutely massive. And then on Plunder, you forge all of your other allies. This is a fantastically powerful card, especially coming out of the Weapon Masters, and something I expect to see quite a bit of as the Weapon Master theme branches out in Standard. This is a place to where the Weapon Masters have really been lacking. Once you get up to 4 mana, to where we see the Combat Cook, you don't really have any playable improvised units beyond that. But having this just massive stat monster at what's going to be like a 6/5 Scout or a 7/5 Overwhelm, that also comes down and has the potential to, say, put +3/+3 on the board and then just give you like 16 or 17 stats for 6 mana. It's all around just a very high impact card in a collection of cards that really need it. And so I think Captain Indari fits a lot of the boxes that you need in an expensive unit, and it's something that's definitely going to see play. Afterwards, we have an additional Weapon Master unit in the Innovative Blacksmith, so a 2/2 for 3 mana. When it's summoned, you improvise, and then each round, the first time you forge or equip an ally, you heal your Nexus 1. And so just another highly playable card, whether or not it's just being used with, say, Jax and another combat-oriented champion, or if it's used in the more classic Jax Ornn. This is just another very high-powered unit. It does the board stall. It gives you tons of stats. That has the big thing that you'll find with these Weapon Masters like this is it has that potential to get up above 3 health, which is a big kind of breakpoint stat-wise. I think that this is going to be another very useful unit, because the 3-drop space now is only occupied by that the Bandle City Targon one, which is a fantastic card, but it doesn't play spectacularly in the Weapon Master decks because all of your units already have equipment and improvise and weapons. And so as you play either Jax or the 2-cost improvise unit on 2, you roll into turn 3 and you want to play your 3-drop. It kind of sucks if your 3-drop's main thing is putting an equipment somewhere else. And you don't have any targets for it. And so just another high quality card coming out of the blacksmith. Interested to see the way this one goes. After this, we have the Sacrificial Scholar, and this is my pick on the most powerful card coming out of the variety set. This is basically everything that the previous 1-cost faded unit wanted to be, but it gives you just a little bit more. And so if you wanted to think of the kind of common sequences with that 1-cost thing, it would come down on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you'd try to play a 1-mana spell on it, but realistically it wasn't going to be starting until turn 3. And so you would play your 1-drop on 1, on turn 2 you would play some kind of gem generator, and then on turn 3 would be the first time that you get to start dropping the gems. But the problem with the 1-cost faded unit is it dies to literally everything. In a format full of parlays, a bunch of make it rains, it has a bunch of things like the plunder 1 damage thing, pirouette. There's just so many ways in the formats to deal a single point of damage that it was very tough to get that unit up and running. It was tough to drop it on board and then be able to move into the next turn to cast your spell. The Sacrificial Scholar fills that problem by having that second point of health, and then also returning a bunch of spells back to your hand can be quite useful. Also, interestingly enough, it does work with that Bandle City card that we called out first. I don't think this is a reason to really want to be pushing into Bandle City, but you can condense your Sacrificial Scholar, and then when he dies, he's going to put the condense back into hand, and you can move on with more copies of that condense. Interesting little interaction that you can pull off there. But again, this is my pick as the probably highest impact card in the format, especially moving out of a format to where Samira Pantheon was a very real deck. And I feel like other flavors of Pantheon were very close to breaking the mold and breaking away from needing the Samira counterpart. And so very powerful things and very interesting things coming from the Sacrificial Scholar. Now we got to skip back forward, and there we go. So the card that we kind of previewed a little bit first in the Royal Shimmerwing, 5 mana, 5/4 with quick attack. Your other birds get +1 attack and quick attack. And so I initially don't think this card is very good. It's going to take a while for the supporting cast of birds to really show up. But, you know, if you are able to generate kind of a go wide strategy with the birds, this is something that has the potential for a lot of power. It's very easy to kind of think of the bird plus Demacia theme to where you have Challenger Bird and Quinn Bird and Double Bird. If you're not a follower of the channel, that's the 1-cost bird, that's the 2-cost bird that Quinn generates, and then the 4-cost elite birds. You got Challenger Bird, Quinn Bird, and Double Bird. Giving all of those challengers quick attack and +1 attack is a very powerful ability, but you have to ask yourself if that 5 mana price is really worth paying, and if that 5 mana is better than just playing something like Saiyan Thousand Tailed that gives your units the +1/+1 and you draw 2 while you're at it. Time will tell. The kind of thematic problem I have with the Royal Shimmerwing is Ionia is traditionally terrible at combat. And so you are putting forth I should say Ionia is terrible at like unit-based combat. Ionia is pretty decent at single unit combat, right? To where you build up a big Master Yi or something, or you protect a single unit with a deny and a twin disciplines and something like that. It's not very good at putting a bunch of units on the board and attacking. There's been a couple of decks that break the mold throughout the course of time, mainly focused in on elusives. It hasn't been a faction that's really good at unit combat. And so I worry that the Shimmerwing kind of fails in multiple ways, to where Saiyan Thousand Tailed is just ultimately better all the time. But that is with the current set in mind. If we're thinking towards the future and there being more birds and the bird archetype being a real thing in a future set, this will most certainly be a unit worth revisiting, as this is a quite powerful ability if Ionia has the combat-based units to go along with it. Up next, we have the Grave Companion, the dog archetype coming at us. And so this is a 1/5 for 4 mana. Each round, the first time another follower dies, you draw 1. And while that is a fairly powerful ability, I feel like most of the Shadow Isles decks that want to be drawing a bunch of cards don't have any trouble doing so. And so as you looked at a current deck like Fizz Samira to where you're playing Inferna, that's a deck that very much needs to be chaining through a bunch of cards. You're trying to spew off a bunch of warning shots and pirouettes and 1-cost and 2-cost cards. You're very reasonably able to cast like 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 cards in a turn if Inferna is down and sitting around. That's not a play pattern that you very commonly see coming out of Shadow Isles. Shadow Isles very much doesn't have that just like cheap chain it out style of play. It's very much more of a curve centric kind of faction, and I feel like whenever Shadow Isles has wanted to draw cards, they've had enough ways to do it. In playing a bunch of Slayers style decks with Nasus, you didn't play the full sets of the 2-cost draw 2 along with the Spirit Leech. It was just like way too much stuff, way too much card draw that you never needed. And I feel like while Grave Companion isn't a bad card, it doesn't really fill any of the gaps that Shadow Isles needs filled. And so I don't think it's really going to be seeing much play, just because if you want to draw cards, there's better ways to do it. Let's get you out of here, dog. Up to the next one. We have the Pack Attack, and this one is quite interesting to me. This is the one I think has the potential to be the most powerful in the future. It's just not that powerful right now. And so as we talk about any combat-oriented deck, the number one thing I will tell you about any combat-oriented deck is it has to be able to either overwhelm, elusive, or rally. This is just the way that the game has been from the dawn of time. It applies to every format that I've played in the game. Nothing has changed up to this point. Some of the most degenerate cards across the game have been the rallies. You've seen the nerfs to Relentless Pursuit, the nerfs to Golden Aegis, the nerfs to Champion Strength, the nerfs to Katarina, the nerfs to Samira that you're about to see. The most nerfed thing in the game may actually just be this rally effect. And that's a lot of what you're getting out of Pack Attack, right? You start a free attack with an exact ephemeral copy of each cat ally. That is essentially a rally. It's arguably better than a rally in the sense that you aren't losing your physical units on the board, and so you can kind of set up these things to where you pack attack, all of your ephemerals attack, they chop down your opponent's blockers while your real units are at home, and then after you've made the pack attack, you get to attack with your real units. And so I think this has the potential to be, again, the most powerful card coming out of the variety set a month from now. As things stand right now, I don't think the density or quality of cats currently exists to really make this something that you want to be building a deck around. But whenever you look at these cards and you look at this and go, oh yeah, that's a rally, that card is probably very strong, you're spot on. That's a pretty good analysis. And so will the cats be good here in Eternal Season over the course of the next month? I highly doubt it. But as the next set comes out, this cat flavor gets added into the game. We get the opportunity to make a cat build-around style deck. That's to where I could see the Pack Attack really start popping off and really evolving into being one of the better cards in the game. Was that the last one? Let me see here. It's so hard to tell. Beguiling Cobra. I know this is the last one for certain, and this card is garbage. And so a 7-mana 4/7. Each round, the first time you summon another follower, summon an exact copy of it. If your board's full, give this guy stats. And so the only way that this card isn't garbage is if there is some kind of combo card attached to it. And so I don't know what that combo is. We talked a little bit at the beginning about doing stuff like playing Condense with Mischievous Mirai. That's the kind of combo that you can kind of see and piece together kind of easily. But that's what the Beguiling Cobra needs to be doing. Just putting this mountain of stats on board is not good enough. What did we just say that you need to be doing with mountains of stats and combat-based units? You have to elusive, rally, or overwhelm. This card does none of that. I'm curious as to what the stat line you could put on a 7-mana do-nothing unit is to where it starts to be kind of interesting. Like, does it need to be like a 15-15 7-drop to be actually interesting? I'm thinking to that point to where you put the unit on the board and then you can just kill your opponent with Atrocity. Like, that's the point to where these cards start to be kind of interesting. But it's like just this mountain of stats doesn't do enough. And so is there some kind of combo with this to where you play a unit, it summons something, this copies the summon, and you get this like big chain of summons across the board? Maybe. Is there something that you can do with like Greenglade duos and summoning a bunch of units and making combos happen with this? Maybe. But without some kind of degenerate combo, this card isn't enough. And with having cards like that card I hate so much. Not Mirror Shellfolk, the Curious Shellfolk. That is the kind of space to where it's right on the border of being degenerate, and you can kind of very easily see the combos with the generated cards and what's coming out of it. I don't think Beguiling Cobra really does enough. It just puts a bunch of stats on board. That's never been enough up to this point, and I think this card's just going to be a dud, unless there's just some kind of combo that I'm not aware of. And so that's the variety patch. Exciting stuff. And so again, the exciting ones I think are going to be the Pack Attack a month from now. Both of the improvised units, I think that those are going to be quite good. The Captain Endari, along with the Innovative Blacksmith. I think Sacrificial Scholar has the opportunity to have the most impact right now. I would not be surprised to see a big resurgence of Pantheon over the course of the next month. And then, of course, I clicked the thing. Condense. There we go. Condense is a very interesting card. I'm not seeing the combos just yet, but knowing that you can generate this off of Conchologist and make big value chains with this across the board, very powerful and interesting effect. Okay, and so the patch notes themselves. Before we look at the actual cards, I did wanted to call out the one and the bug fixes. And so where are you at, Augmented Clockling? And so fixed an issue where Augmented Clockling would draw a card and reduce its cost when summoned. And so if you had a way to put the Clockling on the board directly from your deck, it's slipping my mind how that was very common at this point, but it was supposed to be a play ability. And there was something weird about the playability attached to a predict, and that predict making it still work whenever it came into play off of a summon. That's been fixed. And so it is a bit of a nerf for the Augmented Clockling. I wanted to call that one out as it's not really shown up in the nerfs and buffs section, and it's definitely a nerf to the Clockling. But that was a ability to where it definitely shouldn't have been able to do that, since that is a play ability and not a summon ability. And so, to come into the actual cards themselves, up first, we have the loaded dice. And so now this operates on your next round. And so the next round, when you deal damage to the enemy nexus, you get to nab 1. And so this card, still garbage. This is one that I thought might have a potential like back in the days of Expedition. It never did. It never came across, and then it never really hit in Standard. And so the problem to me with cards like loaded dice is you're drawing cards out of your opponent's deck probably doesn't fit the strategy that you want to be doing. And so say that we're playing a plunder-based strategy. We want to be drawing all of the cheap cards out of our deck, right? If we think back to Inferna that we briefly mentioned when talking about the Shadow Isles dog, if you have Inferna on the board and you're hitting plunder after plunder after plunder, you're going to be drawing more plunder cards, and you're going to be drawing more cards like Warning Shot, more cards that are just cheap like Pirouette, to where if you're drawing cards out of your opponent's deck, you might be drawing like a 4-drop, a 5-drop, a 6-drop, a 7-drop, and then you just draw these cards that you can't even play because they're so far off theme. And so it's very tough to kind of find the space to where you want loaded dice to actually work. In my mind, if you want loaded dice to actually work, it has to be in some kind of combo deck to where you're trying to deck your opponent. And so you use the loaded dice to draw like 10 cards out of your opponent's deck, and then they get themselves decked later on. And so you did manage to deal 10 damage to the enemy nexus. That should have gotten you pretty close to winning the game anyways, but using this as a value card just doesn't get the job done. I don't think making the investment now and the payoff the next turn is going to be enough to really pop off with this thing. Up next, we have this Celestial package, the Cosmic Inspiration, Cosmic Rays, Supernova, no longer have to behold a Celestial. This is a very powerful and important upgrade, especially in the sense of things like Aurelian Soul. Aurelian Soul was very commonly populating these things, but it was always kind of a dud when you would see a Supernova, but you couldn't play it. But I also lean towards cards like Targonian Tellstones, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, that are able to kind of come out, be a one-of kind of celestial generator, but you're never going to get that second celestial card. And so there's going to be a lot of interesting kind of options with these things coming out. You're going to have to be much more leery of your opponent playing cards that just get that, they get that single invoke, because these cards are on the table now. And so if you were playing that Targonian Tellstones, your opponent couldn't just get you with the Supernova, and now they can. And so, very interesting upgrade to these, and I think it just kind of helps. If these cards turn out to be too powerful, Riot can always go and make Supernova cost like 10 or 11, but it does really kind of open up that space to where if you're playing like a one of Invoke, you now have access to these powerful spells, and it doesn't feel like you're invoking and only getting a choice of 2 cards instead of 3. I think that this is a very reasonable update. Up next, we have Crimson Aristocrat, my favorite change of the new cards. Still a 2/2 for 2, but she deals a damage to an ally and then grants it +1 attack and overwhelm. Very, very powerful. All of the aggressive-based Noxus decks love having this kind of thing. Again, we say it over and over and over and over again. The most important thing you can be doing in combat-based decks is elusive, overwhelm, or rally, and having an additional way to deal or an additional way to grant overwhelm without playing something like Might is very interesting. And so lots of interesting and powerful things that can come out of this Crimson Aristocrat if you're looking to play into the Battle Scars theme to where you're dealing self-damage to your own units. So if you want to give Braum +1 attack and also generate a Poro, you can do stuff like that with this. It works in with your Scarground style decks, but I think it's more important to just think of this in terms of like Legion Rearguard, right? You have that Legion Rearguard on board on turn 4. Your opponent doesn't want to block it, and now you make it a 4/1 overwhelm, and they have to deal with it now. Very powerful and interesting. I love seeing this update to the Aristocrat. She's been changed. Like, this is maybe the 3rd iteration of what the Aristocrat does, and I think she's finally landing on something playable here. Up next is Pix. And so Pix used to just be pure garbage. The 0/2 for 1 mana with the support ability, just immediately dying in combat. Now Pix gets to begin with Barrier, which is pretty interesting in multiple ways. I think of many ways of wanting to play Kaisa outside of Demacia. And so having things like Barrier land on a unit in Ionia opens up that possibility to where maybe you're playing elusive units and now you have a barrier unit as ways to kind of tie in with your Kaisa, and then you can protect her with Deny and the like. So very kind of interesting things there. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to be enough. Maybe you can think of this fitting in with like Shen and some of the barrier abilities, and maybe if support gets a lot of upgrades in the game, Pix could get a bonus there, but without any real combat stats, I don't feel like this point of Barrier is really enough. And I think if you're wanting to make Pix a realistically playable card, you have to move into the space to where this bonus is permanent. And so Pix starts to get kind of interesting if the standard rate for a 1-cost unit is 2/2. Then Pix is delivering less stats than that, so she's giving 3 stats when you're expecting 4, but she has that potential to maybe give a permanent set of 3 stats again later. And so that is where I would start to kind of look for Pix to be interesting, maybe if it was a 1/2, but just being a 0/2 is just way too susceptible for when things go wrong. The support cards already have this kind of snowball-y kind of ability to where they have to be good when you're attacking because they don't do anything on the opponent's turn, and Pix just doesn't do enough in that sense. So up next, Twin Disciplines. This one goes back up to 3 attack instead of 2. Very reasonable, still a very powerful card. It was playable at +2 or +3, +2 attack or +3 health, most certainly playable at 3 and 3. This is one of the classic Ionia combat tricks, and we're going to have to get back in our head that Ionia has this way to deal +3 attack. Very powerful things. After this, Eminent Benefactor, back to the turds. It is kind of interesting having this be a playability instead of a Last Breath. He was very ignorable as a Last Breath kind of card, and now you can get the Epic as soon as he's played, but that's just not enough to make this a playable card. You weren't even playing Eminent Benefactor in things like concurrent timelines, and if a play ability isn't good enough in concurrent timelines, it's definitely not good enough outside of it. And so I don't think you're going to see them move. You would still much rather just play cards like Fan Club President, much more powerful than the likes of the Benefactor. Up next, we have the Captive Yeti. He is I didn't talk about Reputation. Reputation is a cost reduction now. Reputation used to say that the unit costs a certain amount. So it used to be reputation, I cost 2. Now it is moving to cost less. And I think that ultimately works out better in the end. You have these weird situations to where you have cost reduction cards, but they don't work with reputation, and it's not super intuitive. I know that most of the people that listen to this channel are tuned into the competitive scene. You understand a lot of these interactions, but it's not super clear to the kind of common player that if you have a reputation setting something to 2, and then you have a card that reduces the cost of that by 1, it still costs 2 because it was set to 2 instead of reducing the cost. And so I think this cost reduction naming is just going to be better across the board. It does make things odd with things like Stony Suppressor and Pranks, but at the end of the day, I really like this upgrade, and the Captive Yeti now reputation's down to costing 1, like his friend Enraged Yeti does. And so very interesting update there. I thought this guy had Overwhelm. He did. He no longer has it. Interesting. I was like, that's why I used to think this card was good. They just kind of turned this guy back into a dud, right? He used to be a 5/5 Overwhelm. Now he's just a 5/5. Oh, sad day for you, my friend. Maybe you'll get some more Yeti support in the next set. But as for now, that kind of sucks. Up next to the Sanctum Conservator, and so this now kills a follower on play. Very powerful ability. I don't feel like that's enough to make this card worthwhile. I've literally never been in a space to where having 13 slays was relevant, right? You just win the game at that point. Like I'm for sure have had like 15-15 and 16-16 Nasus's, so it has happened, but the number of times it happens is very minimal, and that's in a deck dedicating itself to getting slays. So I don't think the Sanctum Conservator really fits in that sense. There is maybe a world to where with these new Nasus decks running around with the Vaults of Helya, you're interested in the Conservator. Like you don't get the kill, right? This is a play ability, not a summon ability, so it doesn't get it off of the vaults. But if you naturally draw it, then you have some opportunity to still play it there. Like Decenata aren't like a super spectacular 8-drop. They just get played because they're the best 8-drop that's available. Maybe with the Sanctum Conservator now having a little bit of value inside of your hand if you naturally draw it, that it can kind of fit in a deck like that. But at the end of the day, it's too expensive for too low of a payout on the return ability. Up next, Draven. Look at that. He's got his 3 health back. What a joyous day. Such a fantastic day for the lovers of Noxus, right? We got the update on the 2/2. We got this boosted Draven out here. Everything is right in the world. Very excited to see this upgrade. The thing, though, that makes me kind of interested with Draven is if you ever really want to play Draven over Samira, right? Samira has come into the game, done a lot of the very similar things that Draven does. It's cheap, it has a quick attack, has a combat interactive ability, has a generate a card on play and on strike. They both do very similar things. And I'm curious as we adventure into the lands of Eteranl if Draven ever overtakes Samira in these decks like now, like where we're playing Samira, Jinx, and Constructed, and that used to be Draven. I wonder if Draven takes that space over, or if just because he's better, or if I wonder if Draven takes that space over so you can play Samira somewhere else in best of 3. But nonetheless, I definitely expect Draven to make his way back into Constructed ever since he's been banished out of Standard. Definitely much stronger now that he has 3 health instead of 2. Withering Wail, down to 4 mana instead of 5. This is fine. You know, this is a probably necessary card to have running around in the formats. It doesn't make me want to play Shadow Isles cards anymore. This is just stylistically something I would never want to do. If you're a follower of the channel, you know that I don't want to be playing Withering Wail. I don't want to be playing these dumb control decks. And so if you like playing dumb control decks, you're probably hype about this Withering Wail update. It's most certainly better than it used to be. But it's not something that I'm excited to see, as I want to run my aggro decks full of 1 health units. And so get that one out of here. Our friend Concurrent Timelines reduced back down to 1 mana from 2. The 2 mana thing wasn't really that big of a deal. It certainly mattered, right? But for the most part, you didn't have too much of difference between playing the Timelines on turn 1 and turn 2. They did let you do stuff to where, like, on turn 1 you play Timelines, turn 2 you play an Improvise unit, to where with the Timelines now you had to hold it until turn 2, and then you play your 1-drop on 2, and then on turn 3 you're good there forward. But it's certainly better, costing costing one than two. Dave Bow bound to be super excited. He's one of the one of the top players in the land. Concurrent timelines aficionado. His life has probably just been made with the reversion of concurrent timelines. After that, Poppy back to a 3-3, not back to a 4-3. Do you all remember there being a world where Poppy was just a 4-3? What a fucking absurdity that was. But her being up to 3-3 is extremely relevant. Again, the place that we look at most units is that 3 power space, and so you get a lot of 3/2s for 2 mana, you get a lot of 3/3s for 3 mana, and with Poppy being at 2 attack, she didn't really get to boost all of those units, especially looking in terms of Bandle City, to where you were playing a lot of cards like Grandfather Fae generating the Owlcat having 3 power, and then Poppy not being able to boost that 3 attack unit because she's so small. And so I definitely expect her to come back into the lands of relevance because this 3 power is an exceptionally big breakpoint in terms of boosting the rest of the units on your board. And so Riot knew better. They didn't take her up to 4. I would have been so stoked for a 4 power Poppy, but 3 is where we're going to have to live today. I definitely expect her to make her way back into the meta. Middenstoke Henchman, still garbage. You know, I don't know how many changes Riot's going to make to this card. It's never going to be any good. You make it a 10-10. Still just garbage, okay? And so move on from that guy. Wisefry gets an additional +1/+1, so it starts out as a 4/8. This is one of these cards that surprised me that it's never really made its way in. Like, how many units do you need to actually hit with this thing for it to be relevant? Like, if it's a 6/8 for 6 Overwhelm, that's not a bad deal. It's just that Bilgewater hasn't really had the big amount of overwhelms that you need to pull off this strategy. So if you look at something like Darius Nar or Sejuani Darius, whatever, like these Freylord, Noxus-based kind of overwhelm stacks, they have a bigger density of overwhelms to where you just don't get that out of Bilgewater. And I think that's been kind of the big deal for this thing. I don't know if it's like getting to the point to where it's crossing over into relevance, but I feel like it's just lacking the good kind of combat interactivity that you need across the rest of the faction to make you want to play something that isn't Noxus or Bilgewater, or Noxus or Freylord. And so it's getting better. You know, if you got to make it a 5/8 one day, then maybe we'll give it a shot then. But I don't see the Wisefry breaking through. Up next, we have the Grand Plaza. One of the most oppressive cards ever released into the game is reverted back to its natural state. When a unit is summoned, it gets +1/+1, and Challenger, it's currently at +1 attack only. And this is a very powerful card in terms of snowballing on the board. If you want to assume that everyone is just playing equally sized units, right? So I play a 2/2 for 2, you play 2/2 for 2, I play a 3/3 for 3, you play a 3/3 for 3. It just automatically makes all of our units bigger than yours. And then as we get into combat, our big units trade with your big units. And so that 1 point of health was astronomically important in terms of generating these combats that all of your units just win. And I suspect the Grand Plaza is about to make a return as well. And so very powerful. It's like I'm trying to think of this in terms of that new landmark coming out of Demacia, right? And like even with the landmark giving like +3/+3, is that better than the Grand Plaza giving Challenger? Probably not. And so it's very interesting to see these two kind of competing with each other for the boost your stats the most award coming out of Demacia. But we're definitely going to see some big board control strategies come out of the game with the addition of the Grand Plaza back. Captain Erika, this is one of these like never played old-timey kind of cards that I could definitely see being played at 6 mana. So capturing a unit, also having Spell Shield, also being an elite, it's just like a lot that really gets tied into this unit, and it could do quite a bit of work now that it only costs 6 mana at the price point that you would be paying for a Vengeance. And so I think in terms of Captain Erika, has a lot of opportunity, more so in best of 3 than as a ladder grinder. Like if you're playing elites and ladder, you might make an excuse for including 1 copy. There's a lot of contested plays at 6 mana in the elites deck between things like Jarvan and then Genevieve and Cytherea and now Captain Erika, like you have to be really good at 6 to make your way into the deck. But if the format devolves into something to where there's just like a lot of really go tall kind of decks, right? So if there's a lot of Pantheon, if there's a lot of Ornn, if there's a lot of just like equipment based grow this one singular dude kind of deck, then Captain Erika can get a chance to shine. With her costing 8 mana, she was just way too expensive to ever come on board and be useful. But at 6 mana, I could definitely see her as an answer to some of these go tall decks. And so if you're kind of building together a anti-brawler kind of lineup in best of 3, I think Captain Erika might have a shot, but in terms of ladder, maybe a 1 of, probably a 0. All right, up next, On Guard, costs 2 mana instead of 3. This was a limited superstar. I played quite a bit of On Guard in the old Lands of Expedition, but in Constructed, it's not going to make it. Now, it does cost 2 mana, so you might have to start considering it getting generated by Seraphine or by Encore or any of that nonsense. But outside of that, I don't think we're going to see On Guard in any constructed decks. Again, as we're thinking in terms of like the Captain Erika, maybe there's a world where you include 1 copy of it in your deck, but probably not. This is just typically a win more kind of card, not something that's going to make its way into standard. Out of the way, pure garbage. For the rest of the game, allied buffs, except barrier, are permanent, draw 1. The thing holding this back has not been its mana cost. I'm curious if you take the draw 1 away from this and then just make it cost 1 mana, is this card worthwhile at that point? And I'm still in the camp of probably not. And so with this thing still costing 4, I don't think it's really going to make an impact on the meta. If you play in the lower ranks or a lot in the normals, this is a very popular card. A lot of the casual players do really enjoy Out of the Way, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it a lot there. But in the lands of competitive play, Out of the Way is just not going to make it. Next below, Iceborne Legacy, now costing 5 mana instead of 6. Again, this is a card that definitely had some highs and some lows across its lifespan. With the nerf to Poro Cannon, Iceborne Legacy hasn't seen any play since. It's not to say that there's not something that will resurface to make it playable. It's definitely better at 5 mana than it was at 6, but without some kind of big daring Poro style deck, I don't see it making its way into Constructed. I don't think this costing 5 is what stopped it from being played in the Spiders decks either, although there has been the Elise Spiders deck with Iceborne Legacy that runs around on occasion. And so maybe, I don't think that mana point is what was stopping it from seeing play, but the opportunity is there for it to improve, costing 5 mana. Escaped Abomination keeps getting all the buffs, right? He was recently upgraded from a 4-2 to a 3-3. Now he gets back to his original stat line at 4-3. And so we'll have to see if some of these kind of Slayers-based decks make their way back into the meta. It seems like a deck that's always kind of on the cusp of greatness, and now that this monster has all of his stats back, I could definitely see a Thresh Nasus style Slayers deck making its way back into the meta, because this is a ton of stats coming off of a single unit, and so very powerful out of that guy there. Into the Blessing of Targon. So it costs 4 mana now instead of 5. And this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier as we were talking about the Invoke cards. I had a reasonable amount of success with the Targonian Tellstones. It was most commonly played as a Blessing of Targon, but it was a very nice utility card, being able to generate a Hush, generate Blessing of Targon, or a late game play in the Behold the Infinite, the Invoke card. And so I don't think this matters for Eteranl. It could if something like Poppy Taric makes a resurgence, but this being the flip card on Taric. So if Taric is a common card, knowing that Blessing of Targon costs 4 instead of 5 is definitely a boost to Taric. But I'm thinking in terms of standard, I guess, and the usage of Targonian Tellstones, a card that was right on the edge of being, quite playable. It gets even more so now with that boost to the Invoke card and also the boost to Blessing of Targon. I think this is definitely a card to watch, not so much in the upcoming month, but when the next set is released with those Targonian Tellstones still hanging out, just very, very relevant having two of the spells within the Telstones improve. Last but not least, in the buffs section, we've got Kanaku Lifeblade, still garbage. He gets his 3rd point of health back. The Elusives deck hasn't been real for a long time, and having this 4-mana Elusives unit just isn't what that deck is trying to do anymore. It's trying to be much more aggressive, much more fast, and so you have either really aggro-heavy Gringlet Duo-based Elusives decks like you would see with tokens, or you have the more combo-esque recall style like Samira Kennen, Ari Kennen style decks. This unit doesn't really fit in any of them, and it's just too expensive for what it does. It needs to be like a 4/4 for 4 to actually start being interesting, and so don't think this guy's going to see any play. Down into the nerf section, Samira finally catching a bit of a nerf, and so the two things that are happening to her, the rally functions like her level up ability now, and so the rally kind of counts down until you hit your next attack token. And so you don't have infinite time to play spell after spell after spell after spell. It's going to reset as your turn starts with the attack token. And that's a very functional update. I think that's a reasonable nerf to Samira. It also mirrors how her level 1 ability works, and so I think overall that's pretty safe and fair. The big change to Samira, though, is going to be on the flare. The challenger can only be attached to Samira now, and so as you say, play Samira on turn 2, your opponent Mystic shots her down. Now you can't use that flare on anything else other than Samira, and that's actually where the massive nerf is going to be happening now. I was doing a ton of work here recently with Samira and Samira Jinx to where you get the Reborn Grenadier on board, like the 3/2 ephemeral unit, and then the ephemeral unit is what you put the Challenger on, and you just attack naturally with Samira. You can't do that kind of nonsense anymore, and so as we talked about Draven being the kind of discard king, is Draven going to overtake Samira in the lands of discard decks anymore? It's a very realistic possibility now with the flare becoming much weaker. So Samira's still going to be a fantastically powerful champion, but she was definitely due for some nerfs. After that, Tristana now requires 5 allies instead of 4 to upgrade. That's fine. Bandle Gunners loses its spell shield. That definitely makes it weaker, and was probably a little bit deserving. I'm curious if, depending on the power level you want to see out of the Bandle Gunners, if it shouldn't have been dropped to 9, because it does lose out on quite a bit without Spell Shield. Now it can get stunned in combat and can get concussive palmed or recalled or whatever. Losing that Spell Shield is a big deal, but I feel like this deck needed a bit of a nerf as well. The Tristana nerf, not as big of a deal as the Bandle Gunners nerf. Last but not least, the final one in here, Powder Pandemonium no longer grants vulnerable. It is a big change, but not enough to stop you from playing Powder Pandemonium in the decks that want it. You weren't really playing it because it gave out the vulnerables. You were playing it because you had a bunch of boosted attack Powder Monkeys, and now you're getting to deal like 6 damage or 8 damage or 12 damage. And so it's still capable of doing that. Definitely weaker, don't get me wrong, but the decks that want it are still going to be happy to have it. And so that's it for all the nerfs and buffs and new cards. Lots of exciting things there. Otherwise, the changes that we mentioned to Reputation are noted here, to where it reduces the cost of the spell in place of the set cost. And then Momentous Choice, this is actually a big one we skipped over. If you're equipped, it costs 1 less, so it goes back to costing 1. It doesn't double spell anymore, but it gives an ally +2 attack or +2 health. Very useful in terms of playing something like Aatrox Kane, not as much if you're playing things like Varus, losing out on that double spell ability. Kind of painful for him, but this card was pretty unplayable at 2 mana as a double spell, and I think this should bring it back into the lands of the lands of competitive play. In terms of the other things within the patch notes, a couple of things to note. The Gauntlet schedule is up here. A bit of a bummer with the free build best of 1 being the first Gauntlet coming at us. This is one that I was kind of interested in playing, but I think we're going to be focusing in pretty heavily on Eteranl right from the get-go. So maybe we'll make 1 or 2 videos with the free build best of 1 Gauntlet, but I was really hoping this would hit like 2 weeks in or 3 weeks in. but I guess that does conflict with the Runeterra Opens. And so it is worth noting the first week and the last week are going to be the free build best of one, and then pretty much every other week is Eternal, with just the next to last week being Singleton. And so very interesting and fun things there. If you're wanting to get some free icons and stuff, the Pride bundle is out here. A lot of this looks new to me. I just remember on the last year's bundle getting the Twisted Fate icon. It's a very good one, but these other ones, I thought this Cherry Bro in the bottom right was an anniversary celebration, not the Pride celebration, but all of these free icons things are here for just logging in, and then the Convergence icon for the Echo game here as well. Also, they make note of a updated skin. They don't say what it is, but it's going to be there tomorrow. And so, interesting stuff, lots of good changes, lots of things to spice up the meta, throw some curveballs at us. I'm ready to get excited for Eternal. Gonna be lots of fun coming out here. And so, lot to cover. Agree or disagree with any of it, be sure to let me know in the comments section. I love to hear it. I love to tell you how right I am and how wrong you are. It just fits in so perfectly. And so, that is going to do it for us today. I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way, and you had a good time watching. So this is Bust, and we thank you for being here.